so much for being here to this free webinar open to the public that the FDA is putting on to highlight some of the research of Dr. Marc Whittmann, who's going to be one of our keynote speakers at the 2026 Floatation Conference in Norfolk, Virginia from September 18th to the 20th this year. We hope everyone on the call has tickets and can come out to the conference and make it. And yeah, we wanted to give Marc the opportunity to talk to the audience before the conference because he's done so much work these past 2 years. And yeah, a lot of it's like coming to fruition with these amazing studies. So I'll give a little bit more of a detailed introduction about Marc. Marc is a research fellow at the Institute for Frontier Areas of Psychology and Mental Health in Freiburg, Germany. He's worked fairly extensively on like time perception, consciousness, altered states, the relationship between bodily experience and subjective time. He's the author of a text called Felt Time and Altered States of Consciousness. It's a great, dense, but great read. Many people in the float community were introduced to his line of research through Helena Harubi's presentation at the float conference that was in San Antonio, where she discussed research showing that flotation-REST can induce altered states of consciousness associated with changes in body boundaries and subjective time. And that research helped to orient the float community to giving some more precise language to something that many floaters have recognized experientially and directly in the tank, that the sense of the body and the sense of time can really change in profound ways. So today, Dr. Whittmann will be discussing, I think, a variety of things, but including a paper that is called Experience After Flotation-REST, Relaxation during floating mediates the afterglow effect. And this will just be one of, I think, a variety of interesting topics. So, Marc, thank you for being here. And I'll hand it over to you to go through your presentation and some of these slides. And then afterwards, we'll have some time for Q&A. So yeah, really looking forward. And thank you, Marc, for being here.
Okay, thank you, Chris, for this nice introduction and give me opportunity to present my work. So the title, some sort of what I'm presenting is all really, the contents, which are some sort of related to the sense of time and bodily self, which might at first glance seem a little odd, yeah, but I will unpack this and show you why this is, for me, the essence of the float experience, yeah, losing the sense of time and bodily sense. And I will then also bring, of course, my empirical findings. I will refer to 3 studies today on flotation-REST into context. At the conference, I will have different emphasis I will talk more about the microphenological study, but I have 2-3 slides on this today. Today is the first day it is published and available online as published paper in BMC Psychology and Complementary Medicine and Therapy. And but I want to first start with a little background, like a conceptual embedding context of all what I'm doing and why am I doing this. Then I will highlight Helena Ruby's study she presented in San Antonio. I think it's 2024, I think two years ago. And just as a recap, relating to what happens during floating with quantitative methods, with questionnaires. And then I'll talk about the microphenological study, a qualitative study. And then I'll go to another quantitative study with Iraklis Pantatsis, my master's student, whom I actually also, coincidence, saw today. He's now in training to become a psychotherapist, where it's all about this afterglow phenomenon. So what happens or what you experience after you've been in a flotation tank. And yeah, and then I'll wrap up everything together. So first of all, now my conceptual background. So why self and time? Yeah, that seems maybe a little odd. But so I start from basic experience, everyday experience. And there I would say it's always about that self, body consciousness, and time consciousness are together up and down regulated. Yeah? So if I have an intensified awareness of the bodily self, I have an intensified awareness of time, or a weakened awareness of bodily self, I have a weakened awareness of time. So time and self are up and down regulated. And we know this from boredom, waiting time studies. Yeah? We have an intense, negatively felt overrepresentation of time and self. Feel, oh, time drags during boredom. Why? We feel ourselves very much and time drags. But then in flow states during pleasant, engaging activities, we're so engaged in the activity that we have an underrepresentation of time and self. We don't feel ourself and time, and then suddenly we realize, wow, time has flown by. So this is this up and down regulation of time and self, which will be important also for understanding the results in flotation tank research. Just an example of what I did in a study with boredom. So we had people took away the watches, cell phones, reading material whatsoever, because we had a cover story. Oh, we have to, you're coming here for a computerized task, typical psychology task. And then we said, oh, sorry, that's a cover story. Our computer broke down. Yeah? Please wait here until we come back. And why did we do this? We wanted to have people attend to time and the arousal level increasing. What am I doing here? Why am I waiting? And then after exactly 7.5 minutes, the experimenter came back and asked, so how did you feel? How long was that subjectively? How fast did time pass? Etc., etc. And very clear relationships, not surprising, but the first time that we quantitatively showed this is the stronger the sense of self, more thoughts about time, more boredom, the longer subjective duration and the slower passage of time. Then the other opposite flow states, yeah, so that's interesting, this conception by Csikszentmihalyi with the components of flow experience are about the intense and focused concentration on the present moment of what I'm doing in this pleasant, engaging tasks, yeah, and a loss of reflective self-consciousness and a distortion of temporal experience, and in peak states, something like a loss of the time sense. And we did this actually, so with a video game thumper in 2D on the screen, but also in virtual reality, and did a huge study and could very clearly show that the more flow subjects experience as assessed with an inventory, the faster time passed. Very clear effects. So this is this up and down regulation of subjective time and self in everyday states of consciousness. But now, next step, going to altered states of consciousness. So this is what you read here. The first quote is the non-duality experience of a very, very experienced meditator with 40 years of experience, over 50,000 hours of meditation experience. Yeah? And it's all about the dissolution of the senses of self and time. So what he then says is the timeless awareness during meditation is an awakening. It has no beginning and no end. This timeless time is an immersion into a being where no comparing happens. It is timeless presence without the sense of an I, without observer. Perception and perceiver are one. So no time, no self. In this deep meditative state of this extremely skillful meditator. But then another example is using psychedelics. Yeah? So Benny Shannon, for example, wrote a book and also an article in a journal on the time distortions on ayahuasca, this South American brew with psychedelic effects. And you see, I won't read this, but you see the parameters, the temporality, and this modified temporality that can happen. People report under influence of ayahuasca, but also there in peak experiences, people say that, oh, there was no time, no self. So this is altered states of consciousness. And so then you could say, oh, well, why does Marc Whittmann so focus on time and self? There are more things to altered states of consciousness. Here is led by Larry Ford, a review in this journal here, Neuroscience and Biobehavioral Reviews, where we had a state-based classification scheme of altered states of consciousness, where we went through all models, all papers we could find, which had different induction methods for altered states of consciousness. And we came up with these 8 dimensions where you see in red the bodily self, the body sense, self-boundary, and the time sense are exemplary, very important for understanding altered states of consciousness. Yeah, and so now here's a picture of Helena Ruby. She's now also doing her psychotherapeutic studies. And so very clear, I don't have to tell you what flotation rest is, yeah, but just focusing on why it is so important for me in the initial experience very often is actually an increased time awareness through increased interoception. You're in there, you're not, there's no light, no sound, you're not distracted by anything. Maybe your mind wandering is there, yeah, but at some you feel yourself very much, and time might pass very slowly at the beginning. But then over time, even in your very first initial session of flotation, and then of course later in subsequent sessions, you also feel something like a loss of sense of self and time as a very prominent experience. What I like to call this is instant meditation. Yeah, that flotation tank experience is something like an instant meditation, because so I've been now dozens of time in the floating tank, and they are very different experiences, but what we always have is a very strong relaxation response. And afterwards, when you come out, decreased mind wandering. So that's why I call this instant meditation. Now going into this first study we did, led by Helena Ruby, a quantitative study. So what we had 50 healthy individuals, volunteers, with this randomized study with 2 conditions. One was the flotation rest in this floataway cabin for 2, so a spacious cabin, yeah, where people don't get claustrophobic. And as a control condition, we had bed rest, meaning there's a water bed, actually even in a salt room. That was just by chance that it actually was a salt room, so even the salt air was similar. No light, no noise. And then and why do we have this bed rest condition? Because you could always say, okay, we need to have this experience of flotation rest versus something else. Because very often, if I talk about my research, people say, oh, well, I have this at home. I've got my comfy bed. I switch off the lights. I'm in this comfortable blanket over me, and I relax there. It's dark. I don't hear anything. Why would I buy this expensive thing? Yeah. So we have to show that the effects we have are stronger than a very strong control condition, bed rest, for example. So first of all, you have this familiarization session, which is always important if you have novices, yeah, that they know what it's about and they're not totally distracted by, oh, this very strange situation. And after only when the second time they come in, then we actually do the quantitative and qualitative assessments, 60 minutes pre and post measures in these 2 conditions. And we had several instruments about balance, arousal, relaxation, stress, fatigue, anxiety, and altered states, a validated instrument, the PCI for consciousness states, bodily self, important perceived body boundary scale, which has shown to be sensitive for effects in meditation. And for the first time, we used it here also for flotation rest. And then, of course, subjective time. Now you know why I'm doing this. And here's just this example of this body boundary scale, which has been shown very sensitive to effects of altered states, especially in meditation. And now we also wanted to use this in flotation rest, where people then afterwards say, okay, during my experience in the floating tank, my body boundaries were that such and such perceptible. Okay, quickly the results, affective states. Here you show, okay, these people who are so annoyingly always said, oh, I have my own bed, I don't need a floating tank, have a point there, because in both conditions, post versus pre condition, we could show a reduction in arousal, anxiety, tension, and stress in flotation rest and in bed rest, comparable. But what are the differences between the 2? We could show that in flotation rest, there was less anxiety after flotation than in bed rest, less tension as compared to bed rest, and less fatigue, which is also interesting because meditation, for example, if we compare it with meditation, as I was saying, this is instant meditation, is also not, some people say, oh, this is like sleeping or something. No, you're actually in a very awake, alert state, but relaxed. And we actually show this also with flotation rest, that in flotation rest, people are less fatigued than in bed rest. Then sense of self and time. So we could show that there was stronger time distortion. You see the scales down there, how we use them, how people had to answer them, the visual analog scale for time and the Likert scale for the body boundaries. So stronger time distortion in flotation rest and a stronger loss of body boundaries in flotation rest as compared to bed rest. Then, yeah, but it has something to do with altered states of consciousness, and that's what we could show with this validated questionnaire, which has two sub dimensions, altered experience and altered state. They're called differently, but they have some different items beneath them. So they're quite similar, but they have different items beneath them. And we could show that the dissolution of body boundaries was clearly related. So more altered states, the more dissolution of body boundaries, and the more time distortion. But you see actually the dissolution of body boundaries as a stronger correlation coefficient, and it's also more significant. So we can show, okay, time distortion and dissolution of body boundaries are related to altered states of consciousness in flotation rest. And then very interesting, also for clinical applications, although our subjects were normal subjects from the general population, so not diagnosed with anything, but still there we always have different anxiety levels in every day. But we could show that through flotation, we had a loss of body boundaries, and the more loss of body boundaries, the stronger a drop in anxiety through flotation rest. So that's quite impressive that we could show this with the general population. So a small recap. So I think with our bed rest condition, we had the strongest control condition to date. And in both flotation rest and bed rest, we found this decrease in anxiety, tension, and stress. But flotation rest was stronger in reducing fatigue, in reducing anxiety and tension, and people were also less fatigued. And we had strong altered states of consciousness, weaker body boundaries, and more time distortion. And then this, you could say, this anxiety reduction we found, related to weaker body boundaries, maybe something like a new anxiolytic effect, which we found, which could be interesting for treatment protocols with different induction methods, like meditation, psychedelics, etc. And so why do we do this? Here now is the +1 article by Justin and colleagues from Tulsa, from 2018, where they showed with 50 patients with anxiety, strong anxiety levels, how one float could extremely reduce the anxiety levels of these individual patients. And what you could say, why is this so effective flotation? Is because psychiatric symptoms are defined, depression, anxiety, through a hyper-awareness of self and time. It's all about themselves and about how bad they feel, and time drags, and a loss of connection to other people in the world. But the core features of AC, as I showed here, or we showed here, are some sort of antithetical to these symptoms, through the loss of self-boundaries and the distortion of time. And then people, if they lose their self-boundaries, they open up, they may be more open for connection with other people and the world. So here is now our paper as published of today, but it's already circulated for half a year as a preprint. And I will just go into 2 slides I have just as a teaser, but then I will say more, let's say Norfolk, Virginia, when I come there to give my talk. And so microphenomenologically is basically a detailed qualitative assessment of experience, where you're not so asked about what people experience, but how people experience. And to start this protocol, you see on the left upside this graph where we ask people about the change over time of different experiences. For example, about tension was one question here. And then they indicated, there at the beginning, it just went down, went down, went down, and then peaked, or there's a trough, and then goes up again. And then we marked these two ends and said, okay, now we focus on the interval between the two red stars and how did you experience these things? And then this what is called diachronic analysis, is over time diachronic. And Helena discovered now these four phases, and like an initial phase is orientation phase. Then there is a transition phase where you start to get a loss of your usual space-time orientations, and also there's an altered body perception. And very, very important is the phase of letting go. I'll talk about this more when I come in September. That this moment to let go, and if you let go, then basically you come into phase 3 with your altered states of consciousness, and then later you have a phase 3 maybe of reorientation. But then, so this is the diachronic phases of the flotation experience. And now, see to the left, I won't go all into this detail. This is also just one graph of several graphs you can find in the article. You see, this is just phase 3 altered states of consciousness, where we go through all what the things people talked about. And you see in yellow, you see the more important things for us now, which were by 14 subjects, were most frequently reported across subjects. So calm, this is absence of mental content, they feel mentally relaxed, but even something very nice, luminosity. So it's about light. So people had radiant images, points of light, or radiant body they felt of having themselves. This is one example of what somebody said. And somehow something was also bright. So in the open forehead area somehow, not just pulled up in the dark like that, but very, very much as if it were a ray of light. Then you have the loss of bodily sensation. No, it's more of a very pleasant feeling. So it's more, so this realization, I hardly feel my body, it's motionless, I don't move, nothing moves, even time doesn't move. This refers also to the loss of time sense. Either people had a slowing of time, or they had a standstill of time, so no time moving. Then loss of body sensation. So one quote here, and what I found amazing was that I didn't even notice the other areas of my body. Well, I don't know, the stomach or whatever. And what that was somehow also very pleasant. So not feeling the whole thing anymore, but that it melted away. And so you see already this correspondence between qualitative analysis in this microphenological interviews with the quantitative analysis. Then positivity, so one quote, I don't know for how long, but for a while there was no fear, such detachment, freedom and connection at the same time. Yes, that also gave me strength somehow. And now I still feel like recharged. So these are these contents of what subjects reported phenomenologically. And also this recharge is, I think, important now when we come now later to this afterglow effect, because then afterglow is actually about this feeling of recharge later. So we are afterglow effect. This is with my master's student Iraklis Pantatzis. So we had 34 healthy subjects. So we're back to quantitative analysis. So again, we had 2 sessions. We only used people who had already some experience with flotation, so we didn't need the familiarization session. 60 minutes in both conditions. Only now poor Iraklis also had to advise subjects to shower after the bed rest condition, because we anticipated if we hadn't done that, some reviewers would have said, oh yeah, maybe this afterglow effect is just because people in the flotation, after the floating session showered and were so fresh, which they didn't in the bed rest. So we also had to ask people after they were on the bed, the water bed, to shower. So that this was hold equally. And then, so time-wise, we stopped the time after they exited flotation or the bed to getting dressed, entering the anteroom where the experimenter was. And then we had a waiting phase of 10 minutes where they were undisturbed alone in a chair. So they would get a feeling of themselves, so that we don't basically ask them immediately, how do you feel? Yeah? And then they're overwhelmed. But they have these 10 minutes of being alone, relaxed, and sensing what happened to them. And only then, on average, 26 minutes after they left these conditions, we asked about, first of all, again, what happened during floating, but also then the afterglow experience. How do you feel now, basically? And oops, is this? Oh no, just a second. I'm missing. I'm missing one slide, but that's very quickly said, because very important in the area of replication problems. Yeah, we could replicate our initial findings of the Helena Ruby study, that people felt more relaxed during the conditions, more relaxed during floating. They had also a significantly stronger loss of body boundaries, and they felt that time was also more distorted very significantly. So this is very important in psychology, that we had a pure, very clear replication of our initial findings with new subjects. 2 years later, we find the same same reports, results in this follow-up study during floating. But now to the facets of afterglow. So what we asked, we had an afterglow inventory. I will show you in a second what the afterglow inventory is all about. It was developed for assessment of afterglow after psychedelic ingestion of psychedelics, and what you feel later. So when the main effects are gone, and then you feel back to some sort of normal and orienting yourself in time and space, but still there are differences in what you experience. And this is what the afterglow questionnaire by a study group in Berlin assesses. This is also published now recently, 2024. So afterglow we looked, and we found very strong differences in afterglow effect. So more afterglow in flotation rest than compared to bed rest. Then more mindfulness in flotation rest versus bed rest. So the feeling more being in the present moment, you could say. In the mind wandering scale, we did find difference, but in interoception, again, we found differences, significant difference, that I felt more their bodily self afterwards. So subjectively, no differences in exteroception. We thought, because very often you have this feeling that what you hear, what you see is very more clear after flotation, yeah, but it's probably related to that people were still in the floating center and they didn't go out. If you go out after the floating center, you feel the noise is much more distinct, light is more clear, yeah. But this we couldn't in this study we couldn't assess that. So afterglow, more mindfulness and more interoception. So what is the afterglow? You see the afterglow inventory has 21 items, and just list some of them. And you have these sub-dimensions of vitality. You feel more vital. You're more transpersonal, that you're more connected to the world, and you feel more interpersonal. You're more connected to other people, and you feel more creative. So you can read some of these items. So I feel more comfortable in my body. I'm thankful for my life. I feel connected to deeper aspects of myself. I feel emotionally connected to other people, and I feel that all is one. That's already nearly a mystical state, yeah. But this just shows that on this, although this afterglow is not a full-blown mystical experience, it shows it is more so after floating than after bed rest. Yeah, so this is float states and afterglow states. So I'm coming to an end. So the float experience, it's all about relaxation and altered states of consciousness in what we measured: weakened body boundaries, time distortion, and more. And I will talk more about our microphenomenological study and the output there. And you could compare this with deep meditative states. So we had this, that meditators came to the floating center, and they said when they came out, wow, although they didn't meditate, they said, oh, this is just like as if I had been at a meditation retreat for a whole day. That's how it feels, as if I had meditated for a whole day. And then afterglow, so this is one during floating, this is after floating. So the psychedelic afterglow, you're also more mindful, you have higher interoceptive awareness, which you could compare to mindfulness, yeah, very clearly. So you could say the float experience is similar to deep states of meditation, and the afterglow is more related to being mindful of you and on your world. Yeah, so of course, just the outlook. So the people in Tulsa, yeah, with Justin Feinstein also, Martin Polus, Al-Zubi, Khalsa, they showed actually the neural correlates of floating. That's, I think, is very significant because what they showed was a reduction of the default mode network, which is related to the narrative self, and the posterior insula, which is connected to the bodily self. So they could show that after fMRI after flotation versus fMRI before flotation reduced these networks of the self, which relates also to our more psychological findings. And what one could do is we're thinking about this using flotation-REST also in combination with psychotherapy. So we're thinking about this because Iraklis now I just met him actually a few hours ago. He's thinking of doing a PhD, looking at how flotation opens up the clients to psychotherapy. There, Annette Kjellgren from Sweden did a few very remarkable studies on this that is actually helpful for the psychotherapeutic process. But it could also be, for example, an idea as a preparation for therapeutic psychedelic sessions. So if someone has never had any psychedelic experiences, having a flotation experience beforehand could be a little step before you do this full-blown psychedelic session. But then of course it's a low risk alternative to psychedelics because that's what you always forget. You have a quite high responder rate with psychedelics, positive responder rate, but some people really get into really bad trips, even in controlled studies. Yeah, that's a little underrepresented. So their flotation-REST could be a good alternative. Yeah, and then related to this idea of instant meditation. Yeah. Why not? This was also an idea we had. Why not have like a flotation-REST program similar to an MBSR program in meditation? So these are some things as outlook, and thank you for listening here to my talk.
Wow, Mark, thank you so much. Yeah, what an excellent overview of some of the work that you've done over these years. Really well done, and so much looking forward to the fleshed out explanation of your microphenomenology paper at the conference later down the line this year. So now we're in the Q&A portion of the webinar. Looks like we've got like maybe a little over 20 minutes here. If the peanut gallery doesn't mind, I would actually like to start with a question just to start us off. So, something that is interesting to me about this work, Mark, is that, in your participant sample size, you did have some individuals who are like contemplatively inclined or had some prior experience with meditation. And it gets me thinking about, the control condition of like what it means for the control condition to have, meditators at different levels, entering the float tank. And, if participants have contemplative backgrounds, how do we distinguish the effects of flotation-REST from the effects of what they spontaneously do inside of the tank? Should meditation activity inside the tank be treated as a confound, or do you consider it just a natural affordance of flotation? Like if the tank invites people into spontaneous meditation, whether that's like a focused attention style, an open monitoring style, like could we say that doing nothing even as a meditative affordance actually makes for a stable control condition? Could float-REST amplify these contemplative strategies so strongly that meditators and non-meditators are effectively receiving different interventions? So someone who's working with the complexity of control and this new intersection of like technical meditation and flotation research. Like, how do you square up some of these very complicated issues with like attentional strategy of participants, their cultural conditioning? They might not even know that they're applying a meditative strategy while they're floating. It's just mindfulness has entered the cultural zeitgeist to such an extent that people default to watching their breath, for an example, which could have a profound effect. So I'm curious how your colleagues like deal with these issues. Do you even think about it? Very curious.
Yeah, so of course, so what we did was using convenience samples of people we could get in Freiburg. Now, Freiburg is a university city and very some sort of mindful oriented. So if you have a university city and people are mindfully oriented, they have some sort of background. Yeah, I would say probably something like half of people had considerable meditation experience. The other half, not only. Everybody has had a little bit, maybe. Yeah, but on some did not at all. Yeah. Of course, then these subgroups are too small to really make conclusions. But this is that's right. So let's say what would happen, you could say, if you went into a more rural environment. Let's say, I mean, if you're in Tulsa, Oklahoma, maybe it's easier. Yeah. So you're in the center of the US, where people are not so much oriented towards meditation, or you go somewhere in Germany to a similar place. What would happen if you get a convenience sample of 50 people there? That could be interesting. So where you could make sure that people haven't meditated or something. Yeah? So this is absolutely an important point. What we are now looking at, so in 2027, you can invite my doctoral student, Cyril Costines, yeah, who is a meditation expert, and he's doing his PhD in the flotation tank, where he invites very experienced meditators. Yeah? And what he's doing is actually 4 arms. So each meditator comes for 4 conditions. One is floating without meditating, bed rest without meditating. So that's what we already showed, but now with very experienced meditators, at least 1,500 hours of meditation experience, but many go beyond, even in the range of tens of thousands meditation experience. Yeah. Then we have meditating in their with their method you're used to, outside of everything, yeah. Plus being in the floating tank and meditating. So we have all combinations, and we have now collected, or Cyril has collected 24 of these meditators, and he wants to finish in August, September, having 40 of these highly expert meditators. And then he'll analyze, and for the next session, Float Conference 2027, he can present you the results. And he will have then more expertise in this, because that is clear. As I said, we had several of people who came with strong meditative experience, and they reported this without meditating, getting into very strong, deep meditative experiences, which someone else maybe would not have. But one thing I can say from personal experience and from experience of other people, what you always have is this relaxation response. That's what you always have.
Great. Thank you, Marc. Would you mind putting the name of the researcher you just mentioned in the chat?
Yeah,
I'd be interested in having a little chat with them.
So if you go onto the web page of our institute, maybe I'll find it. You find this email. Oh, actually, I know it by heart because it's just a second. Yeah. So it's no precious information I give here because it's on the email,
of course,
on the IGPP website. So,
yeah, great. Thank you so much. So, let's open up the floor for some questions. Does anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask Marc? Just raise your hand, and yeah, we'll call on you. And if no other questions, I will ask another. But the floor is open, everybody. Don't be shy, okay?
Yeah, do you want to go to a second one, Christopher? I'm monitoring the chat and prompted them to either raise their hand or ask a question there. So I'll let you know if anybody chimes in.
Okay, great. Yeah, for sure. So, let's see. Yeah, what might be interesting? I mean, I could ask, kind of in follow up, when you said your colleague has this study where he's working with these sort of four conditions, and yet you have, experienced meditators, quote unquote. They could be at a variety of levels. Someone who has 1,500 hours is going to have a very different baseline phenomenology than someone who's done 10,000 perhaps. So when you're inviting these different people into the tank and you're asking them to not meditate, if they have like consolidated insight based on their practice, whereby their baseline phenomenology is radically different than someone, and there's a certain automaticity to the way that their mind is now operating. How can you say that that is like an actual control condition? You're telling someone to not meditate, but by default, the way that their mind operates is such that they are meditating insofar, and this might be more related to like a non-dual style, consolidated luminosity. Like, I've read your paper with Lama Lundrup. So there are these issues, like people, less experienced less experienced floaters even report they cannot report on the experience itself. There's this cessation of perception, feeling, and consciousness, versus like a minimal phenomenal experience. Like with this model that you laid out, how are you addressing this issue?
Yeah, so it's a mixed method. So we'll have Thomas Metzinger, the philosopher, actually developed an inventory for this minimal phenomenal experience, based on hundreds of very experienced meditators. And Cyril is using this questionnaire. But then he's also, of course, talking qualitatively to the people, exactly raising these questions. Because this is exactly what we want to find out. So there will be a difference. So of being in the floating tank and using specifically certain meditative techniques of attention regulation or something, open monitoring, focused, etc. And this will be different to if people just are in this floating tank and not using these techniques. But you are right that what happens is that they automatically will get into these states. But still, you could say one state is you deliberately use these techniques of cognitive control in using these techniques, versus you sort of move into such a state without cognitive control, and just let's say it just happens, you just let go and it happens, But this is what we find out. That it could be so that this we could be that on several of our quantitative or qualitative questions, these meditators won't differ between the conditions, or maybe they differ. It could even be that they are much better in their meditation technique, or they can get into deeper states in the meditation technique, because that's what they're used to after thousands or tens of thousands hours of meditation, then being in this tank and meditating, because it's some a new experience. Maybe it's even stopping them getting into the deepest states. But we have the quantitative and we have this qualitative material, which then Cyril can talk more about then next year.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for engaging with some of this complexity. Open questions. All this is so wide open. This is
Yeah. We just
so
don't
new.
know. Uh-huh.
So no, we really don't know.
And we can also look at different meditation techniques. Yeah, so we have 40 meditators in the end. We could, let's say, do subgroups. Yeah. And there will be maybe different results depending on meditation technique or meditation experience, etc.
Sure. Looks like Jeannie has a question. I see their hand raised. Jeannie, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, thank you, Mark. I appreciate everything you've spoken to us today about. And I may have missed it, and I apologize, but how soon do you anticipate the Afterglow Effect paper to be published? You said
Oh,
it's
that's
not
already
quite
there.
ready.
So I've got because it's behind a paywall, yeah. You cannot access this without paying, but I put in at the top of this chat, there's my email, yeah, whitman@igpp.de. And if you send me an email, I can send the paper out to you. It was published end of 2025.
Oh, perfect. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Hey, Kat, I saw you jump on camera. Did you have a question or want to say hi?
No, I just wanted to be engaged because before I was doing something else that I just wanted to
Yeah,
follow up on. But
good to see your smile there.
thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
We have a few minutes left. I don't, Christopher, did you have anything else, another question, or we can just kind of
But
go into
I
our
could
close. I think
add.
Christopher could go all day.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. So I could add something what we also plan of doing, yeah. So that's
Yeah.
what we're so one thing is so to look at the difference between what happens when you for the first time go into a float experience and then the second time. So that's so with a qualitative together with my colleague Eric Pfeiffer, who was also author of our first qualitative paper. Doing interviews on how people felt about gravitation or loss of gravitation, darkness, and silence. What we're doing now with two students, doing qualitative interviews of people who had never been in the floating tank and also have no specific experience in meditation, and what they experience after they've been there for the first time. And then the other student takes it when they come back doing it the second time flotation, what they experience there. And the important thing is because in the quantitative tasks, in the quantitative studies, we always had our questionnaires, how about time, about self, etc. Yeah, so we impose something on them. Even this qualitative questionnaires on gravity, silence, and darkness, we of course ask, so how was this loss of gravity? How is silence? So we impose something. But there, for the first time, what we want to do is not imposing any questions, but asking qualitatively or assessing qualitatively what people experience, whatever that is. Yeah? Being totally open minded and seeing what they answer.
Yeah, I'd like to see that progress. I mean, we talk about in our center a lot, and a lot of this is pretty standard, like a intro three pack, because
Mhm.
similar to my experience, the first one, we encourage people to go in with an open mind, just explore, experiment, play with the light, try different positions. Second time, we can make improvements, answer questions on anything that might not have been perfect the first time. And then by the third time, if you haven't already, kind of experience that deeper, relaxation. So, and hopefully, first to second is one step, but hopefully we're working our way down that float count as studies progress over time.
Mhm.
Mandy, you have your hand up.
Hello.
Amanda.
You had
Hello.
mentioned the flotation therapy with psychotherapy combination. Can you just clarify if there was someone that was looking into that, or is interested in doing that, or what was the
Yeah,
statement you made about that?
yeah. So, my the first author of this Afterglow paper, Iraklis, he wants to do a PhD on this because he's now becoming a psychotherapist and he wants to do this. Also, Helena is now thinking about something like this in future. But there are these studies by Annette Kjellgren, this Swedish researcher, who in the let's say the last 20 years did a lot of floating studies, but I think she's some sort of about to retire, so she's not publishing anymore. But 15 to 20 years ago, she published two studies, one qualitative and one quantitative, if I recall correctly, where she could show that people who were first in the floating tank and then directly after that had a therapeutic session, that compared to other people who did not beforehand go into a floating tank, and then just went to the therapeutic session, that they opened up much more. That there was much more resonance with the therapist, and then the therapist also thought that the patient did much more progress. Yeah, they opened up, they had much more progress, they could really move on due to this flotation experience beforehand.
We've been doing that for the last year.
Mm-hmm.
And I can attest to everything that you said, that's exactly what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
We have
good.
social workers that provide the talk therapy after the flotation session. And it's just based on a 45-minute float session and then a 45-minute session with the social worker. Tons of repeat clientele. Everybody's saying it's extremely beneficial for them. So if you're a person that wants to do the PhD, wants to connect with us to just ask some questions or whatever, we're open to that for sure. We're actually bringing on a second social worker now to start the process, like to grow the business.
Good.
So it's an excellent pairing, and it's working perfectly. And I'm in Canada, so we're also able to bill this through to private insurance and have it covered fully, the float and the restoratives and the talk therapy. And it's only through the School of Social Work, and it's actually only in my province, because each province has a different licensing board connected to the school that you train from to become a social worker in the first place. So we had to go through a whole process through the ethics board for the school and everything like that to get approval for it. But yeah, it's been a game changer for us for sure. And for the clients and moved us all into the mental health realm where we've always intended to be in the first place, So yeah, good stuff.
Yeah. So if you see my email address at the beginning of the chat. If you just send me your email, then I can connect Iraklis with you and me, and then you maybe can share something furthermore.
Yeah. Okay.
So at igppde.de.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah, we've got a couple minutes left here. Anyone have a question? Yeah, I could certainly ask another if no one's got anything. All right. Yeah, maybe I'll get one more in, I guess. But what do you think about I have an interest in how do we connect, and this is also part of the mission of the Research and Medical Committee for the Float Tank Association. How do we connect folks in all sorts of different research fields with the flotation tank as a tool to help them with their work? And someone who has been coming to my mind for years now is, of course, Thomas Metzinger and his work on minimal phenomenal experience, and the intersections between MPE and float tank phenomenology are obviously, or maybe that's the thing, obviously to people who work with the float tank, but maybe not so obviously for people who either don't know what the flotation tank is, who are like in this realm, or they just like haven't made the connection yet because maybe it's like not as intuitive as I think it is. Do you know if Metzinger has ever like engaged with the flotation tank, if he knows what it is? And
he was in our floating tank. We had a discussion afterwards. So he came to our floating tank. So I know him also personally, and we exchanged. And so he floated in our tank, and afterwards we had a discussion. And he was, interestingly for Metz, so Cyril actually coached him, and he went to the floating center. And so interestingly, Metzinger said that actually the floating experience was okay, but nothing, let's say, revolutionary for him. But then he emailed back 2 days later that his afterglow phenomena was so striking, yeah, that he still 2 days later sensed something like something was different. Yeah, so for him, this afterglow was the most striking thing.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think he should get in again and go longer, and then might be talking a different ballgame. Yeah, if I might ask one more thing before we go, all these studies that you've undertaken, the float condition is 60 minutes, which is, the most represented time session, not only in the flotation industry, but also in the research. If you look at the Uri Meah's like literature review, this is a verifiable fact in the research field. 60-minute float has been looked into more than anything else. And I know your work concerns like time pressure, and it is a salient feature of like the 4-phase model in the microphenomenology study, where there's some time pressure in phase 1. Do you think that could be alleviated, or things could, the research could have a different trajectory if people were just allowed to float for as long as they wanted? Some research in the field has a pool preferred condition, where they're allowing people to float up to 2 hours if they want to. However, that's still a cap. There's still a cap, If people truly had the opportunity to float timelessly, they could get out when they feel done, or peak emergence has truly resolved, and that takes time for people. What do you think the implications of timeless floating without constraints could have on your research?
I can only say float longer. So let's say when I was in Tulsa, so I had the clock timed for 2 hours, and that was my deepest float experience ever. So it was maybe the 3rd or 4th time ever I was in a floating tank, and that was the deepest float experience. So this sense of, at some point I had this feeling or this idea, oh, I have no thoughts anymore. That was basically my last thought. And then I just was, no time, no self, etc. And at some point, interestingly, I could start, because I experimented around, I started after a while, I don't know how long, to count my breathing, which is a mindfulness technique, actually. And normally you cannot do this very well if you're not very mindful, because after 12 or 30, you count your breath. 12? Was it 12 or was it 13? Then you drift off, but there, totally steady I counted slowly every breath until 100. Now, if you say how long is one breath cycle in relaxed state, could be 5-6 seconds. So it means for 10 minutes, I was completely slowly counting without any disturbance of my mind wandering. But then after that, back when I got my own floating, which was in January 2022, I don't know why I also started having always my 1 hour slots. Maybe it's also because it's during work, or you go out and okay, let's have a 1 hour float. I come out or something. But recently, I also thought about all these questions. I went into 1.5 hours, and there again came into one of these very deep meditative, where I just totally I felt as if I were in jelly. Didn't move anymore. I had really this feeling of being in jelly, and again this very deep meditative experience of no sense of self and time. I just was. And so that was also because I had put the clock to 90 minutes. And so this first 60 minutes was like always a relaxation response, up and down with your experience. But then suddenly, it must have been after the 60 minutes, I would say, suddenly I got into this deep meditative experience. So that's actually where so I think a very experienced meditator, for them, an hour can be completely enough, maybe even half an hour. So we're back to your initial round of questions. Maybe for half an hour for a deep meditator could be enough. Could be enough. But for someone like me, who's not that experienced meditator, you need longer time, and then you get into really these deep experiences. So I can only say float longer. Yeah?
You heard it here first, people. Stay in there.
This conversation has
all
me
right,
so
well,
excited. Sorry, I was just going to say this conversation has me so excited for Float Conference and chatting with you in person.
Yeah, please. Yeah. So we'll see each other then in September. Yeah?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming, everyone. This has been great. If you haven't got your tickets to the Float conference, like go buy your tickets. Come on down. Like this is the kind of conversation that we have at the Float conference for multiple days on end. So yeah, if this like lights your fire, come on down. Great presenters, good people.
Justin Feinstein will be there. Yeah.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, Matt, do you have anything that you want to plug before we sign off here?
Float Conference 2026, Norfolk, Virginia. I know this is open to the public, but it's hosted, we're put on by the Float Tank Association. If you're not an FTA member, you can help support what we're doing by becoming a member. Members also get a discount on Float Conference tickets. So the membership almost pays for itself just with the discount that you're getting on your Float Conference tickets. We run these monthly webinars. Leading up to conference, we're featuring our speakers like we did today with Mark, and last month we had Abby Morris, who is the former medical director for the International Association of Firefighters, speaking on her experience with floating, helping first responders, and now she's out working with Justin directly. He's somehow talked her into moving to Maui, Hawaii, to help with the Float Calm project. So yeah, we have and more speakers getting announced shortly. Just really excited about conference. Keep an eye out.
All right, friends, have a terrific day, and yeah, wishing you the best. Mark, thank you again.
Thank you, Mark. Good seeing everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye, guys.